Hello, everyone. We're about to have a session talking about regulation, which could be an uninteresting topic or a fascinating topic, and I think we've got a very good range of people that can put some life into this topic, because at the end of the day, regulation does greatly affect both the technology and what it's allowed to do and the businesses and how they operate. So to just give you a quick overview, we have people talking about the regulatory situation in Europe. We have Kantora from Japan, and we have Sinclair from Australia that gives us an overview of what's happening in the world. And that's what we will try to communicate, is how this is a global change that's happening and the way it's being influenced. So I'll start off and introduce myself, and we'll just give a brief introduction of everyone here so you know the angle we're coming from, what we know about, and our perspective. So my name is Mark Toohey. I'm a lawyer from Australia. I also lecture with the course in digital currency regulation, and I have a blockchain company, so I'm actually practicing what I preach. Could you introduce yourself, Avi?
Yes, I'm Avi. I'm with eToro Group. eToro is, to this date, the largest investment network in the world with 6 billion registered users. We've been in the trading and software development space for 10 years. We developed and started offering cryptocurrency trading 5 years ago, so we've been there in very early stage. And we plan on focusing in the next couple of years in developing this offering internally.
I'm Kento Toyoda from Japan. I'm an assistant professor in Keio University in Japan. And actually, I'm a researcher, and it's for academic portion. So my research topic is about trying to find useful information from the blockchain of the Bitcoin to find fraudulent events or fraudulent or scams from the Bitcoin transaction. Thank you.
And I am Astianax. I'm the CEO of Norblock. It's a company that basically works with KYC on a blockchain platform. Previously, I was also the chairman of XBT Provider, which was probably the first company to issue an ETN mirroring the Bitcoin value on NASDAQ in Stockholm.
I'm Alex from Serbia. I'm proud to be one of the first graduates of the MSc course in University of Nicosia last summer. Thank you. I was lucky enough to get into Bitcoin mining in 2011 and stupid enough to sell almost all of the Bitcoins I have mined back then. Then in 2012, we have with my friend, I've created a company, and we have made our mission to create a Bitcoin ecosystem in Serbia. So we have a Bitcoin exchange, we have a small network of ATMs, we have a Bitcoin payment application for merchants. We have a franchise of Cointelegraph, so we also deliver news and basically trying to build the whole ecosystem to help other people use it and innovate.
Hi, I'm Sinclair Davidson. I'm a professor of institutional economics at RMIT University in Melbourne, Australia. Just as a shameless plug, I will be talking about what we are doing at a university this afternoon in the education space. But I've been doing a bit of work thinking about how to regulate and how to tax in the blockchain space.
Okay, thank you. That's the next. Can you tell us about some of the changes that are happening in Europe and the policy movements that you see taking place?
Of course. So actually there's quite a few things happening right now in Europe. If we look at the regulatory space, we had the 4th AML KYC directive coming into play last July. We have MiFID II, end of year. We have GDPR next May. All these are actually aspects that really affect not only the cryptocurrency world, but also the blockchain, enterprise blockchain space. So what we see, and I've talked to regulators in 2 major European countries where we're actually present, and one also in the Middle East, they're overburdened with changes in the regulatory framework, and actually they cannot really get ahead of the game. when they actually facing technology like cryptocurrency and blockchain, they just do not seem to be ahead of the curve. They do not seem to be following what's going on in the market. And that's a real challenge for them.
Avi, how do you see these changes will affect your business?
We've been analyzing the European developments when it comes to regulatory development, and we realized that regulators divided to three. There is one type of regulators that's simply overwhelmed with already existing initiatives and doesn't have any time to spend on understanding the blockchain technology and the underlying business models around it. You will find regulators such as Luxembourg and so on that fully acknowledge the business opportunity for the jurisdiction and trying to stretch already existing e-money regulation to cater some of the business models. And you have other regulators like the FCA, like the Gibraltar FSC, that is working on new regulation, whether it's via sandbox model or a unique law that's designed for specifically for DLT business models. And those regulators are going to be very active in the next couple of years, and I believe will attract the big companies. Cyprus is also looking into, CISEC is also looking into it, and lately released guidelines in this subject, and we hope that it will be constantly developed in the next few years.
Just for those people who are not familiar with the idea of a sandbox, what does that mean?
So it's basically a platform that regulators created for companies to apply. In the UK, there were almost 150 companies that applied for a different status, mainly from Europe. And regulators assign officers to those companies to analyze their business model and allow them to operate with restrictions and try to put some rules and regulations around it in order to learn each and every domain, and eventually it's going to translate into local laws and directives. But right now, they basically work with those companies, mainly startup companies. Very few big established organizations join this initiative. But this is the regulator's way to attract fintech companies and not miss out of this opportunity and learn as the EU regulation develops.
Okay. Alexander, how does that compare to your working situation?
Well, I'm here to represent unregulated markets. We have almost, well, not almost, we have no regulation regarding cryptocurrencies, which is not a surprise, having in mind that we have been using PayPal since late 2015. And in a very limited way, we cannot interact using PayPal with other residents of Serbia, only with foreigners, because you are not allowed to send foreign currency to other resident of Serbia. So we have relatively strict financial regulations, and the only thing we have in Serbia close to regulations is the central bank statement, which says that Bitcoin is not a currency, and because of that, central bank is not in charge of that. And they are, of course, warning that investing in cryptocurrency is very risky. There is no central bank to back his value, and basically that's the kind of environment we have been working in. And that statement is for us as exchange operator helpful in some way, but also limiting in some other ways. It is helpful because since Bitcoin is not treated as a currency, we don't need licenses like financial institutions need to be able to operate. On the other hand, we also have issues with that statement because since Bitcoin is not treated as currency, there is no reason to be VAT exempt. So we are finding creative ways to not charge 20% on top of the Bitcoin price to our customers. We are kind of doing the intermediary business. We are intermediaries between buyers and sellers of Bitcoin, so we don't have our own Bitcoins and we don't sell them. We are just taking Bitcoins from our customers that are selling, keeping them for some time, and then selling to buyers. The problem with that approach, and then we are only having VAT on top of our commission, not on top of the whole price of the Bitcoin. So that's the way we have found to operate. The problem with that is that since we don't hold any Bitcoins officially, every now and then, which is once a month, we have to have the balance between sellers and buyers. So we need to have the amount of Bitcoins that we have bought from our customers has to be the same as the amount that we sold to our customers, which is very difficult because market just doesn't work that way. So when we have a surplus, we sell it to Bitstamp, for example, or we buy it from Bitstamp if we have demand which is higher than supply. So it is a bit difficult. So every end of month is very stressful. But we managed somehow to overcome those obstacles, and we're still working.
Okay. Now, I do want to come and talk about Japan in a minute, because I think some of the most interesting stuff on the global stage is taking shape in Japan at the moment. But just, if you can hold on for a second, we'll just talk to Sinclair about what's happening in Australia, and then based on that, I'll talk about why Japan is of interest.
I just want to pick up on the point about VAT, which in Australia our equivalent of the VAT is the GST, which gets levied at 10%. And a couple of years ago, our tax department declared that Bitcoin wasn't a currency, and therefore you had to pay the 10% on top of everything else. Very luckily, I hate to say this, we have an enlightened politician. But the Parliament then called an inquiry into what Bitcoin was, and the parliamentary inquiry declared that Bitcoin in fact was a currency. And so the government actually moved to change the laws to define digital currencies as currencies and actually remove the 10% impost from the sale of cryptocurrencies, and that came in the 1st of July this year.
So just to be clear to people, it was actually, instead of it being a 10% VAT, because when you paid the money, that said that was a second supply, so there was 20% VAT.
Sorry, on each stage, yes. So it accumulated. So they actually removed the GST or the VAT off of cryptocurrencies from the 1st of July this year. But in terms of it being an asset class, you will pay capital gains tax. So the differential in the change in the value that you bought it at and you sold it at, and depending on how, if you're a person or incorporated, there's different rates and discounts, all that sort of stuff. So the tax implications are still there, but you can now actually use cryptocurrency without incurring the GST that you were talking about. So I actually think that's a very favourable move, and almost from, I think we got off to a bad start in Australia with the tax office coming out with that ruling. But I think certainly some parliamentarians and some of the regulators have been very quick to actually skill up in this area. And I think, well, given what I think should be happening, I actually think that some of the Australian regulators are actually making some good moves and good sounds in the space.
I'd agree on that. I think they're being very proactive, and also could we talk about the Friends of Blockchain movement?
Yes, so the two senators in our federal parliament, Senator Dastyari of the Labor Party and Senator Hume of the Liberal Party, and in Australia, Liberal is in the European sense, so it's a centre-right party, our Labor Party is a centre-left party. They have come together to create a Friends of Blockchain group, which launched in Canberra about 6 weeks ago or so, and it was one of the most well-attended events I'd ever seen. A lot of politicians from both sides of Parliament turned up, a lot of entrepreneurs turned up, and it was an awesome event. And I think even though a lot of our politicians don't actually really understand what the blockchain is and how it can work, they all realize it's something of incredible potential. And I think at the moment it's certainly bipartisan support to integrate it, to do what can be done, and do good work to actually put Australia with the leading pack, if you like, in terms of this new technology. So certainly Australia, from a regulatory government perspective, is going to try and be more proactive after that false start of a couple of years ago.
So the interesting thing about that event, the Friends of Blockchain, it was organised by a organisation called the National Digital Commerce Association. And this body has really got involved with government. They've actually started to change the law. They're shaping law. So at the moment they're looking at bringing out a a code of conduct for ICOs. The government really now listens to them. They sit down with government, they talk at government level in a very responsible way, very respectful of the government regulators' point of view, and the result is that the regulators, the politicians are now sitting down and talking at a very comprehensive level. So why that's interesting in a global context is Australia signed an MOU some time ago with the UK government for mutual recognition. So if you have a financial services license in Australia, you go to the UK, instead of having to start again and reapply, the vast majority of your application will be accepted, and they'll just look at the local law and how your business model affects the local law. That's all they'll worry about. That then started to expand, again, the old British Empire system to Singapore, to Hong Kong, and most interestingly, Japan. Now, just before I come to that, why this is significant is there seems to be a movement of regulators to do something interesting and be very innovative. That group could form the nucleus of something far more important and far broader. In contrast, the US has a terrible problem with their regulatory system. You need to get 51 governments, 50 states, and a federal government approval to operate your business there. Most fintech businesses, I think the leading one's up to about 40 states at this stage. So you go from a system where you apply in Australia, it costs you $20,000 to $30,000. You can take that to Hong Kong, Singapore, Japan, or the UK, or you apply in the US and it costs you about $1 to $2 million to just get those licenses. So if we could tell us a bit about the other things that are happening in in Japan, and particularly the changes that are taking place between the influence of China and the influence of Japan in these areas.
Yeah, actually, Japan is one of the most advanced nations to regulate the Bitcoin and the blockchain technologies. And the Japanese Financial Services Agency, FSA, just announced, officially announced that the Bitcoin and also cryptocurrency is a legal way for payment. And also it is recognized as an asset, not a currency. And also FSA announced that they required for every cryptocurrency exchanges and wallet services to register with the government. And also the FSA requires them to require some points. One of the big point is the cryptocurrency exchange must check every customers of identifiers, which is to avoid the money laundering system. Mm-hmm. And also it enables KYC, know your customer. So this is I think that Japan is learned from one of the biggest failure of Mt. Gox in 2014. So I think that Japan is learned from them. But as he said, China is in opposite position. For example, China bans every ICOs, and also China every cryptocurrencies exchange in China is banned. So I think
which is a contrast, because originally Japan had a hard view on digital currency, and China was open, and now it's swapped.
Yes, exactly. So I think that many Chinese investors for cryptocurrencies will move to the more optimistic nations like Hong Kong and Japan.
Which is why this international grouping of people recognizing each other's licenses starts to be for a business to be able to so cheaply and so quickly achieve all these regulations is a really useful tool. You mentioned KYC there. For those people who are not familiar with that, that's about knowing your client, and it's a regulation the banks have. If you can't satisfy that, then they'll tend to shut down your bank account, and for many businesses, that puts you out of business immediately. You get a letter in the mail saying, sorry, our bank no longer wishes to have you as a client, and you effectively blacklisted. So it's very important. I was just wondering how that works. So in Serbia, though, if you've got such an unregulated market, how does the KYC impact there?
Well, at the moment, we are not obliged by any law in our country to do KYC verification of our customers. However, we will introduce it very soon because of the problem we've been having for the last couple of weeks. But to understand the problem, just give you the brief explanation of how our exchange works. It's pretty simple one. You go to our website, you make a request to buy or sell bitcoins. If you make a request to buy them, you just put your name, the amount that you want to buy for, and you put your Bitcoin address, and you get payment instruction. So a couple of weeks ago, a guy, we still don't know who he is, makes a request to buy bitcoins in someone else's name. He prints the instruction, he puts his own Bitcoin address, he prints the payment instruction, he puts it in the envelope together with the threatening letter, and he brings that letter to a restaurant, and then a couple of days later to another restaurant, to a coffee shop, saying something like, you have 48 hours to make a payment according to this payment instruction, or your restaurant will burn in flames, something like that. So I was in the last 2 weeks, I was in the police department twice, explaining them that my company has nothing to do with that, and that I'm not the one trying to blackmail them. But yes, it's good business model. Luckily, none of them has made payment. They just reported it to the police. And,
but how are the restaurants?
Sorry?
Are they still the restaurants intact?
Yes, it's probably an amateur because he was making requests every time from the same IP address, which is in fact in Serbia. So he's not very skilled, obviously. And they have captured him on camera in one of the restaurants when he was climbing the stairs in that restaurant. He tripped, so he was probably very nervous. So probably not a professional, but anyway, we don't want our exchange to be used for that kind of crazy ideas, and we will impose some KYC verification procedures, maybe not for lower amounts, but certainly for higher amounts. It's not that anyone is pushing us to do so, but we just don't want to have problems like this anymore.
But if I could pick up on that, to a large extent, this is why, even though the blockchain and Bitcoin was established to avoid trusted third parties, in actual fact, there is a certain minimum level of regulation which operates in a market economy, which actually makes everybody feel safe. Now, most market economies are massively over-regulated at the moment, and industry is always pushing back against regulation. But I think having minimum levels of regulation and good behavior to avoid overt criminal behavior is actually a positive. And I think introducing those levels would actually see the blockchain economy massively expand again. A certain amount of legitimacy and habitual, let's say, honesty would probably go a long, long way to actually massively increasing the value of what we've seen already.
Yes, I agree. Some reasonable amount of regulation would only help, as long as it's not too much, that it prevents the innovation. It's hard to find the balance.
Yes, how to find the balance. And I think a sign of maturity for this particular industry will be when it's fighting with all the other industries against excessive government regulation. It'll almost be a mark of arrival, which I know a lot of people don't want to have that fight, but unfortunately I think you can't be a respectable mainstream legitimate business
if you're not having respectable, mainstream, legitimate arguments with the government about excessive regulation.
And there is ways to manage those situations with government. In the early days of Bitcoin, when everyone was very suspicious about it, there's a financial tracking department in Australia that takes payments. And by an anomaly of law, they didn't look at the value passing with Bitcoin. They said, we only track money, it's not money, therefore you don't have to report to us. But instead of just accepting that, I always advise my clients, send them all the data anyway, and then give them a note. I know I don't have to give this to you, but if you ever want to look at it, here it is. And that completely transformed the attitude, and all of a sudden the authorities started looking at Bitcoin not as a threat, but as something they could work with. So sometimes that compliance and coming up close to it and embracing it can actually work well for your business. Would you like to talk about that?
Yes, I think that what we call reputation risk of counterparties that engage in this ecosystem prevents, I think, the economy from growing faster. I'm referring specifically to banks not cooperating, not servicing the market, payment companies shying away from this business, which basically live the industry to work with non-reputable bank, non-reputable clearing agents that overcharge, and then it passes back to the clients. So I think that getting regulation on board, getting some sort of a standard, acceptable standard when it comes to KYC will serve everybody around, and eventually will get this industry to grow faster and get more service providers to feel that they can manage their reputation risk properly and be, courage enough to step in and enjoying this innovative trend that we experience.
Another war story is a few years ago there was a dark day for the Bitcoin industry in Australia where most of the businesses got a letter saying, sorry, your bank account has been closed. Yeah. Because we'd taken a different approach with the regulators, the people that stepped forward was the regulators and said, sorry, this doesn't seem right. This sounds like the banks protecting, trying to exclude someone else and keep someone else out. So it was amazing how they came to bat for the industry and helped open up accounts again.
The amazing thing now is that you can see regulators that take the approach to regulate the market, but the central bank doesn't necessarily update the banks within the same jurisdiction that they can now service the market. So it will take us some time, I think, between 6 to 12 months between regulation kicks in and banks being instructed to service the market, and the internal compliance and risk committees take the approach to actually service the market.
I think actually we touched on a very important subject, which actually is that of identity. So identity is a large part, in some cases, smaller part of KYC. But what we see now, and I think in the panel, similar panel next year or in 2 years' time, where cryptocurrencies will be or not regulated, but there will be a consensus, we will be discussing about identity in 1 to 2 years' time. There's a lot of work being done around sovereign identity in the blockchain space. Mm-hmm. Sovereign identity means that no country actually owns who you are. What you do is that you have different parties attesting to who you are, and you use collectively these attestations to create your own identity. So then this is going to become a very big problem, because governments will start losing control of who is actually whom. Is Astyanax my name? I was in discussions with people, they had made up their own names. And when I asked them, okay, but that's a funny name, your parents must have had quite a good sense of humor. Well, they told me, first of all, that my name is Astyanax, so I shouldn't be talking about that. But also, they said that, no, I chose this name, that's my sovereign identity. So I think this is also going to be something that, how blockchain in general will also start going to various facets of regulation.
We've touched on, in the earlier talk there, about central bank digital currencies. Would someone like to give their views on where they see that heading? And for example, there's 90 central banks around the world at somewhere on the spectrum of of looking at central bank digital currencies. Any comments in relation to that from panel?
It's actually the first question I would have is what are the added benefits of a central bank issuing their own digital currency? This is something that, it in some ways actually goes against the whole title of where we are right now.
Exactly.
It's not decentralized at all.
That's right.
So this would be my question, my challenge to them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'd kind of wonder why you'd go down that path. I mean, to the extent that most money is already digital in terms of bank accounts simply being sold and swapped and what have you, we already have that. But it's not clear to me what the relationship would be with the actual underlying currency. We already have private sector organizations that offer private money per se. If I want to trade, so I came here to Cyprus with 100 euro in my pocket, but mostly I came here to Cyprus with my credit card. And if I need to spend money, I simply just swipe my credit card, and that's how I will spend money. So to a large extent, I've already got a digital currency. And most countries in the world, when I go to now, they say to me, do you want to pay in local currency or Australian dollars? So I have all the features of a digitized currency already through my credit card. And for reasons that I don't really understand, the Australian government, for a start, has waged a brutal war against credit card companies around interchange fees, which has been a horrible mistake, I think. But if they wanted to have a digital currency, they would just deregulate the credit card market, and they could have that already without having to go through any excitement. In terms of would I trust a decentralized Australian-issued digital currency in terms of like a blockchain type affair, I would think, well, what value is the government adding? The nice thing about fiat currency to me is that I can pay my tax in it. So the same rubbish money that they distribute to everybody else, they have to take back. Why all of a sudden, if the government started saying we accept Bitcoin, I would never pay the government in Bitcoin. I mean, why would I give them an appreciating asset? It's a strange sort of argument. So I know they're looking at it, I know they're talking about it. I think the private sector delivered a private or a digital currency decades ago. And I would just stick with that.
Yet it seems that two of the leading countries that may introduce this are China and Russia. And again, Russia had a very strong view against Bitcoin in the early days, but now I think it was the Deputy Prime Minister recently spoke and said that they were considering it, and not in the near future, maybe 2022, I think was the year he looked at. I've just come from Dubai yesterday. They're very involved in blockchain. Their stated aim is to have all government processes on a blockchain by 2020, which is very ambitious. Perhaps what's happening in China with the tightening up on Bitcoin is laying ground for a Chinese central bank digital currency. They've already talked probably 12 months ago about putting their social security system onto some sort of a blockchain-based system or a digital currency system. So there's a lot shifting at a very major level in the world. And who knows where that will all pan out. But let's jump into probably one of the most interesting topics in this area, and that's ICOs. Who'd like to kick that one off?
I can start, if I may. So, first of all, how many of you know what an ICO is? Okay, that's a big crowd. So actually, the first, I've heard about ICOs, and I was thinking, how really important are ICOs? So I was May actually this year, time flies, in New York, R3, which is a big consortium of banks, they come out, they announced they raised $100 million. Everyone was super excited, so much money, it's absolutely great. 1 week later, a company with a 3-month-old white paper raised in excess of $200 million using an ICO. And people then started paying attention. Now, for me as a startup, I have to think the following things. Is ICO relevant? Because obviously, it can really raise a lot of funds very quickly. And also, what does that mean in terms of myself if I raise an ICO and I get all this money? What does it mean in terms of my regulator perspective towards my company, but also in terms of my clients. In terms of my clients are banks. I don't think they would touch me with a 20-foot pole if I had an ICO right now, the way things stand. And with the regulatory environment, it's just so fluid that I would be very, very concerned that basically the regulation would go against me. Going against you means that you may even have to return the proceeds from what you've raised, which will not be a possibility in any case. So right now, as a startup founder looking at the ICO space, I would say that I would like to stay away from it for the moment. Potentially, if I had a token which was native to the cryptocurrency world and was not, my clients were not banks, I would consider it, but it's a very risky area right now with a lot of uncertainty.
Someone like to add to that? Any observations?
The way that I think of an ICO is almost like a mini IPO. And in many respects, you are raising money from the public by selling them either a share, more or less, in your future business via the token, or you are selling them a commodity, which is the token itself. And I think a lot of people are going to become very surprised when they discover that most countries already have laws against this sort of thing, or laws that you must comply with around these sorts of things. The Australian government, I think, very smartly have more or less said, our financial regulator, ASIC, put out a press release a couple of weeks ago, more or less setting out existing laws which ICO issuers would have to comply with, which I think is probably the sensible way to go. They say, I'm not a big fan of new laws. I think we should regulate activity, not technology. So they've put out a whole long list saying, if you're having an ICO, here are the things you've got to think about. Do you comply with this law or not? And if not, you have to have a good story around why not. Which I think also will add to some security around the process itself. I don't think necessarily that we should be saying to people this is probably because it's risky. This is an innovative new industry, and all innovative new industries are very likely to be risky. But I think if there is a huge financial scandal where a lot of mums and dads lose money, there will be big demand for regulators to actually clamp down. To my understanding, that hasn't happened yet. So I think coming out, complying with existing laws, even voluntary compliance with the existing laws, is certainly going to save a lot of trouble down the line.
Is the issue that it's too early at the moment, and in a year or 2 years' time, people then will come knocking on the door saying, I invested, where's my return? Or you promised to do this, can you show me that you've done that? And that's where I think then people will go back to the existing law and say, I'm sorry, but you misled us, or it was deceptive, or you overstated, or you didn't state the risks properly.
No, but actually I think that it's slightly different. It's a quite unique investment vehicle in the sense that it's largely funded by cryptocurrencies. Cryptocurrencies have appreciated tremendously in the past year and a half. So basically you have people that they got into Bitcoin for various reasons, or Ethereum, and suddenly they see that their assets have appreciated by 10 times, etc. And they think, well, if I spend some hundreds of thousands of dollars in that ICO, it doesn't really matter. I've made so much money. So I think it's actually an inflated asset that feeds into another inflated asset. So I'm not, even though I would very much like to see some investors saying like, oh, you did not promise to deliver all these things, I think quite a few of the investors are people that will never actually voice that because A, they've made the very high returns as it is, and B, they're not the typical investors that would actually go after someone for not delivering on their investment promise.
It's interesting because as much as we can see regulators as a roadblock or someone that slows down some of these developments, there was a statement a couple of years ago from a senior regulator in the US saying exactly that. We need to step in and protect all these people that have just made money because they will be tempted to put it into bad investments. And we should stop them from losing because money came easily, money could go easily.
But I think there's also the idea of the regulator as a safe haven. If you have complied with the laws as they stand, more or less adjusted for the fact that blockchain is fairly unique, if you have complied and people then lose money, you can actually say we were fully compliant. So the regulator can also protect you from frivolous lawsuits and complaints about losses.
If you've complied.
If you have complied, yes.
Yes.
And I think the issue is many people haven't complied because they didn't think they needed to. But I think when you are asking the public for money, you should always look in to see what rules apply or not. I mean, even charities have quite onerous regulations around them. So I don't think it's unreasonable that people should comply voluntarily just to protect themselves to a large extent.
To give you an idea of the standard for an IPO, if we had a client say, and they came in and they said, we've got 49 stores, and that was in page 5, paragraph 3. In a folder, I would keep a register of all that, and for page 5, 5.3, I would have 49 leases there. I would read all 49 leases, make sure they were all current, and if there was a problem with, say, 2 of them, that their lease was about to expire, then you go through and you put that in there. There's 49 leases, but there's 2 that have these certain circumstances. That's the standard of disclosure that is appropriate. The question then is, in the rush to get the money through ICOs, have they gone through that? And the reason you have that folder and that system is you go on to the next one and the one after, and 2 or 3 years later, someone comes to you and says, why did you put that on page 5 in paragraph 3? And you don't have to guess, you just get the folder, pull it out, and there's the statement, there's the documents. End of question. Were you prudent and rational in what you said? If so, you're okay. If not, well, life gets complicated. So, the trends, just in the closing here before we could open up to some questions, what trends do you see in your particular area over the next 12 to 24 months?
I believe that companies will strive to get as much footprint in this industry. Companies, specifically in Cyprus, already applied for authorization to offer clients to trade in various cryptocurrencies, whether it's as an asset or as a derivative, CFD. I believe that there is going to be a huge need for execution, good execution. Very few brokers today can work with the established exchange and manage the risk, the day-to-day operation with them. So the liquidity side is going to tremendously develop as well. Security is always a huge issue. How do we safekeep? How do we make sure clients actually get their assets and so on? How do we prove best execution? How do we give the clients the best prices? And the nice thing here is that the regulated industry is actually competing with a non-regulated industry over the same type of client. So coming from a regulated background, it will be easier as long as regulators are going to assist, cater, and acknowledge this is an already big enough industry not to avoid. And I think that this is what we're focusing on and plan to focus on in the next 12 months, just to make sure that we have all the right infrastructure in place and making sure that we're not missing this opportunity to non-regulated companies that established out there.
Okay. And what do you see for the immediate future for Japan?
Yeah, I think, in Japan, the ICO is not prohibited, and it's very positive for new technique. And one of the Japanese startup, it's the Tech Bureau, just started the ICO platform, and which is called ComSer. And ComSer offers such as March language white papers, and also a PR of the token ICO sales, and also the management of ICOs and the blockchain itself. So this is, I think, this is one of the big fundamental and basis for the blockchain services and systems. So,
What about Mt. Gox? Has that left a legacy with Japanese regulators?
sorry?
Mt. Gox?
Yeah, as Mount Box, yeah, it's
Is there still litigation going on in Japan? We don't hear much news of it, or I don't hear much news of that lately, so...
I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with
Okay,
such case.
all right,
I'm sorry.
that's all right. So for those who are not familiar with that, was, what, 2013, 2014, a major exchange that was based in Japan did the wrong thing, is the best way to say, without prejudicing the guy. And there's been court cases and arrests and all sorts of things, but a lot of people lost a lot of money in the early days. So it's interesting that Japan has seemed to put that behind them. So what's your forecast?
So actually on the micro view, I would say that ICOs will have a huge impact, regulatory-wise, but also cryptocurrency-wise. Because whatever is the regulator's view, that will affect also the cryptocurrency markets, since they're based actually on cryptocurrency markets. Now, the macro view, I find it great that we have a panel like this right now. I think in the coming years there's going to be more panels that basically are going to be talking about regulation actually happening in cryptocurrencies and blockchain. And that's because the two worlds will be coming together. So, you know, if you can call it the old world and the new world. To paraphrase, no technology is an island. We cannot think that blockchain or cryptocurrencies can actually exist in a vacuum. And I think that will actually, that view, and that very disruptingly sometimes libertarian view, will cease, and basically you will see the two worlds coming more together.
Okay.
Well, from what I can see in our business, we have been pretty much under the radar until this year. But this year a lot of things have changed. I don't mean only the price of cryptocurrencies and the appearance of ICOs, but the type of the people who are getting into cryptocurrencies, that has changed too. And we have, since the start of the year, we have been approached by many serious businessmen looking for the way to invest in cryptocurrencies, to invest as a company, not only as persons. We have also been approached by many universities. They want to organize lectures. They want to organize. One of those even wants to organize a master's course. So it's a lot of institutions are getting into the game. We have been also approached by some banks. We have some projects that we are planning to work on together, insurance companies. So all of these institutional players are getting into the space, and I think the regulators will have to respond to that, because those players want more regulated environment. And I was surprised 2 months ago to be approached by someone from the government. We met, and he said, let's talk about bringing the regulation about around cryptocurrencies and blockchain technology. I thought it will be much more behind. It's just an idea for now. It's just the initiative of the one person, but it's still a good sign that governments are considering that, and they want to get into the game, because they're, for example, my government is losing money for not having regulations. We have a lot of miners, none of them pays any tax. We have a lot of people who have earned a lot of money by trading, and they are also not paying any taxes. I know of one guy that wanted to pay a tax. He went to a bank and he said, I bought Ether when it was under $1 and I sold it now, and I want to take the money from exchange to my bank account here, and please tell me which taxes do I have to pay and to whom. And it went to the central bank, and the response was that profit made from trading cryptocurrencies is not subject to capital gains tax. So the bank rejected the transaction. They said, we cannot accept that transaction because we don't know what to do with it. We don't know how to classify it. So countries are losing money for not having regulations. There's
many
who
people
want to
around
pay
the world
taxes.
that would like that problem.
Yes, there are people who
nice
want to pay
problem to have.
taxes, but they are not able to pay taxes, because there's no way that there isn't a type of tax which they can choose and say, okay, this is the tax I have to pay, this much. And so I think the governments are starting to realize that, and they want to take their piece of the cake.
Catch up and join
Yes.
in, yeah.
I'm actually very bullish about what's going to be happening. I think there's a lot of excitement, there's a lot of vibe, there's a lot of very smart people doing some very interesting things in the space. And for as much as we've spoken about the need for regulation today, one of the things that I really enjoy about this particular industry is that it's also going to disrupt the regulators. So in actual fact, a lot of what they do will disappear over time as the rule of law gets replaced by the rule of maths. And you'll actually find the way the blockchain is designed, you can't cheat, steal, and all these sorts of things that people normally do that regulators are designed to prevent. So in actual fact, while we should be talking about bringing in the regulators in the short term, in the long term they will actually be disrupted. I think the state will be disrupted. I think as we decentralize, we'll see more and greater freedoms. So I'm actually very bullish, I'm very excited. I think the authorities and the people in Australia are more or less coming around to it. You've still got to deal with the fact, though, that people talk about Mt. Gox and Silk Road, and aren't you really just a druggie? What are you buying on the internet that you don't want anybody to know about? I mean, these are problems you've got to overcome, but I think once you start explaining to people what it is without getting into gory details around hash keys and all these sorts of stuff, I was able to explain to my mother-in-law what the blockchain was, and she said, oh, wow, that's awesome. And so I think once more and more people like my mother-in-law is saying, wow, that's awesome, we will see rapid adoption.
Okay, is there anyone that would, with a question? We maybe have a couple of questions. There's a gentleman over there. Can we get a microphone to him?
So regarding when we were talking about ICOs, for example, I'm a third year. Thank you very much. I'm a third year computer science student. My final year project was regarding create a decentralized application running on the Ethereum blockchain regarding using smart contracts. And the one main problem with smart contracts was that, as you said, very new technology, just basically started. And the problem was, what kind of security issues? How do you verify that a smart contract is there? So where I'm going with this is that there was an ICO running called QuantStamp. QuantStamp was, let me just say it's a company that, created an ICO for the token sales, saying that what they will do is verify that the smart contract you wrote is legit and it's secure, and what it says it will do it. So pretty much my idea when me investing in that QuantStamp, I had to do all that kind of KYC and everything before investing into that. My mindset behind that was, even if it doesn't work, I like the project and I invest in the project. Even if the project go bust, I wouldn't go through, as you said, with legal actions behind the company of why it went bust. My mindset is that it's a very useful technology, and I'm willing to jump on the train before it goes live. But the only reason it's not really.
Can you bring it
question.
to a question that we can put to the panel?
Yeah, is that what's your opinion again on ICOs coming again? And I know you kind of answered this, but from my perspective, that I'm just investing based on I like the idea and I want to see it come through.
But of course, it makes sense. The regulators will have problem with the following item. There is a risk element attached to every single investment. If the investor is not aware of that risk element and cannot appreciate it, then that's a huge problem. If it's misrepresented, the risk element, that's a huge problem. In your case, you seem that you understood the risk. It's very high risk, you like the idea, you invested, you don't care if you don't get your money back. That's absolutely fine. But the thing is that we cannot actually derive regulation just case-by-case basis. So there's going to be quite a few people that just heard smart contracts. The Economist had an article on smart contracts, so they thought, I'll invest in this thing which is called smart contracts. And they have no idea what it's about. That's a problem.
It's the regulator's duty. That's actually their job. That's what the reason they exist is to protect people's money.
Yep.
So they have to do those sorts of actions. That's the whole structure.
Yes, I think most of the people don't think the way the gentleman thinks, and people are just throwing money to something they don't understand. And what I personally don't like about most of the ICO is that they're raising way more money than they need, actually, for the development of the product. So they end up having a ton of money that they don't know what to do with, and they're throwing it away. I know personally some of the examples with company raising too much money, and then they're sponsoring events that they have nothing to do with, paying some crazy high salaries to their developers, and just throwing their money away because they don't need the amount of money they have raised.
Which will all go very bad when someone does knock on their door and they have to explain that. Yes.
Yes, hello. I'm Chiara from the European Commission DG Connect. One comment and a bit provocative question concerning what you said before, concerning the central issued, I would say, digital cash money from central banks. So don't you think that it will allow for traceability, better traceability than what we have for cash, for sure? Follow-up of investments, where does money go? Real-time supervision in sometimes happening there, and you know who does what for the banking system, but also for a more micro level, detail level. Better digitization, and finally empowerment of our societies. So I know I'm a bit provocative, and I do not come from a central bank authority, but I think that there is indeed some points that we haven't explored that are there.
Okay.
And there are some societies, for instance, the Swedish society, which are more prone to digital and to digital cash, and it's somehow happening more than probably in other countries that are a bit less educated.
Someone like to take up on
I'm going to be a bit provocative too and say the whole point of the Bitcoin is that we don't want the government to know where our money is and what's happening with it. I very often think that these anti-money laundering laws are what we used to call managing your wealth without the government's permission. So the challenge that the government has around this is that we already have we have one mechanism, your credit card, that is traceable and all this sort of stuff that the private sector developed. And we have an alternate currency, say Bitcoin, that the private sector developed as well, that gives you total anonymity. So what do we need the government for in that space? And that is a question that I think governments are going to have to ponder on. And that's one of the great positives to my mind, is that the blockchain and the Bitcoin will get rid of government as a trusted third party. We won't need to trust the government when we can trust algorithms. It's a difficult spot, I understand, but yeah.
Sorry, I can see there's other people that would like to ask a question, but I'm being given a signal that we need to finish up. One last thing is, yes, government control can be good, but it depends on what government you have and whether it's a benign government or a government that really the public may need a bit of protection from. So could you thank our panellists, please?